All right. So this is like a thing that popped into my head. Not the entirety of what I'm about to say popped into my head, but like an idea. We all need to understand better. I'm not saying you all because I am still learning. We all must understand, like holistically, how the world is set up right now. I don't want to say how it works because it don't work. And I don't want to say how we are governed because really people are trying to rule. That's not just governance. So words have meaning. The meanings must all logically comport in order for it to work. So the difference between what was designed versus what is, and especially in the case of something that doesn't work, in our case, much of it is corruption. However, a lot of the corruption probably, in my opinion, probably stems from higher tier attempts to maintain or retain control of lower tier levels of governance, because it is ultimately about controlling people, keeping us all in line. And I imply no positive or negative connotation to this. There's a reason for that. Dystopia, we hear about. Dystopia, 1984, Brave New World, right? Stranger in a Strange Land kind of straddles the line between dystopia and utopia. It shows you the idea of utopia in some sort of function. Utopia and dystopia are just kind of opposite ends of spectrum from each other. So dystopia is where control to the detriment of the individual's experience in life, the well-being of the people. Dystopia disregards. You see the dis, right? It's the negative connotation. Okay, and utopia, therefore, would be a positive connotation. I would think it would be more of a protopia, or I don't understand the etymology of the word because I haven't looked it up yet. I do know that a utopia is what a dystopia seems to be seeking to achieve. And that it stands to reason, to me at least, that the difficulty in, or impossibility, the likely futility of building a utopia successfully is because it just ends up being a dystopia. Oh, it's not quite in alignment. It's not been done right yet. No, that's not it. It's that the ideas, this is where the thoughts spurred, and I'm walking back to it. But in doing so, I'm kind of setting this up that you see what I'm looking at, how I'm viewing things. A dystopian experience is that of government saying this is, and it's not just the government, it's the people that are in it, okay? Because the original thing of the thought is this is going to seem like an aside. I will come back to the dystopia, utopia, and it will connect, I promise. It's just such a large arc that it looks like a straight line straight up. The individual is a person or an animal or whatever. It's an individual. And we can delve into all kinds of detail and discussion about the human body as an animal versus the human mind as a cosmic entity, for spectrum opposite ends examples in that case. But we won't do that here. But come to the point of the person in the world. We can then have all kinds of discussions about the nature of reality and what is and is not real. If actuality is a distinct experience from reality, even. It's a question I have. Simulation theory goes into this, all that, right? And you can call that existentialism or whatever, but so there's people say existentialism, philosophy. I mean, I guess, I feel like that's reductionist. Not for today. What I'm doing here, just breaking the fourth wall, that is short-term memory chunking, and it clears up other space to think without things getting in the way. Here's a new chunk. We live in a society. Tautology. That's it, right? But a society is a group of interacting individuals. The rules or laws or customs of the society are therefore in place for it's just de facto to help everyone get along, go along to get along, right? And that becomes the framework of rules. Culture is the creative output which should hopefully encourage whatever is in the creative output is going to become the thing that people are about. They're going to imitate their idols, as it were. So if the music is about respect and honor, and the stories that are told that people like to sit and entertain themselves with when they're not out surviving, whether it's working or hunting or whatever, that's culture. If it is about virtue and responsibility and whatever, then the society will come to have customs that surround those ideas. And if it is about irresponsibility and degeneracy, the societal customs then become about that. Now, when the rules and laws, because eventually if population gets large enough, it almost becomes a necessity to have some sort of administration to the needs of all if you're going to have a set of rules and keep it consistent. And this is where you have these levels and tiers that I will be referring to. At this time, I'm going to take that and chunk it. That's going to be civics. Okay. And when I go over like this, I'm saving it into a single chunk where everything is, it's like a file table. And then the rest of everything that's chunked goes into long-term memory, which has nothing to do with the process I'm interacting with. And then I bring the civics thing back. This also clears the philosophy and existentialism from the immediate forefront of the file table. Living in a society, having a culture, population increase results in government governance, administration. However, in the real world, how this is manifest was basically came into feudalism. The ones that were able to more strongly defend their people became rulers. The ones who were most successful at using, organizing others into the process of agrarian society and whatever, became lords. And then eventually, in a lot of places, these fell out of use in favor of the people having a say in what they do. This all is a whole other discussion for another time. We will pat government down, but that's what all that is. But it's by necessity most of the time. Now, taking civics, keeping it in the forefront, coming back to the topic at hand, which is the dystopia-utopia thing. A dystopia is therefore a place where the society's customs are at odds with the law, but the government and all the people that operate it also have culturally pushed all the people into having this issue of still upholding the culture, because the culture is what brings the people into the position to be controllable by the rulers in this dystopia. But it puts them at a complete contradictory internal state in doing so. One manifestation in the real world of this is demoralization, where people simply just don't, it's basically you get put into a position of derealization. You don't know what's real anymore, or you just don't care because it's the only way to function without literal physical pain occurring somewhere within your central nervous system's experience due to the cognitive dissonance. That's dystopia. A utopia is simply one in which it worked. And the steps to achieving it working are an ever-changing, progressive process of trying to avoid all the issues that every previous dystopia has encountered. The difference supposedly being that the well-being of all and the functional liberty of all people. Well, okay, so liberty's not really involved in utopia, because in utopia you don't get to differ. It's just like everything's so hunky-dunky, you just don't care about that. You own nothing and you're happy, eat the bugs, right? That's the idea of utopia. But every dystopia that has happened has basically begun as an attempt at a utopia, including the current, for example, just context, United States government and all the tiers and levels within the country, but also within the world. We only have this experience on this planet to go by. So you can't be like late stage capitalism and what we're the only capitalism that has really happened, because other than maybe the feudal lords. So if you want to say late stage capitalism, like, the end of royal dynasty rule, which was an extremely slow long-term process to go from, what you could constitute that as capitalism into this feudalism. Capital is personal individual property, period. That's what that means. So most attempts at utopia that result in dystopia tend to be in totalitarian, fascist, communist kind of things. Nazi Germany was a dystopia for Jews and a utopia for anybody who fell for Hitler's shtick. And everyone in between was trapped in I just have to kind of not really care about what's real or what's true or whatever, so that I don't have this inside my head all the time. So, for application of this onto planet Earth, you either live in a city or a county. And the cities are inside counties, but the cities have their own sets of rules within their boundary, okay? So inside of cities, there is currently private property, as well as public property, as well as restricted property, whatever. But it's basically even within the city. But the thing is, you have to pay the city your tax to still be the owner of that which you paid for. This is why a lot of libertarians say taxation is theft. But you've got personal property. So, for example, in a shit hitting the fan situation, everyone's individually responsible for their own personal property. This becomes your domicile. This is your castle. Now, the way our world is set up, it's basically a giant tinderbox for most of it. It's not safe, secure, easily defendable. Unless your house is made of brick and cinder block, steel reinforced concrete, anybody shooting at you with a rifle that has a necked cartridge on it is going to be able to put rounds straight into your house. City government has a budget that comes from the state as well as from some local levying to pay for the law enforcement. And for many in law enforcement, it's just a job. Even though on principle, maybe they want to help or do a good thing or whatever it is. It's, I'm not dismissing that, but I'm just saying that some of them would stick around and help even if there was no paycheck coming, and some of them would not. And some of them would stick around for the wrong reasons, and some of them would stick around for the right reasons. County's kind of similar. Outside of that city limits, there's delegated areas where a different set of governance is involved because the population is less dense, and oftentimes the type of road and infrastructure is different from what's inside the municipalities. So then there are states where all of these counties are contained within, and each state has a constitution, whereas counties are like delineated. I don't know that they have a charter, and the cities have charters and incorporation. States have constitutions modeled after the United States Constitution, in our case. Now, there's other parts of the world with other countries, I'm sure it operates slightly differently. Some of them are variations, but there's usually provinces or states or oblasts or whatever. So in the case of the United States, each state has things that the Constitution of the United States does not delegate to the federal government that are their rights. I'm coming to a point, by the way. These states each have basically a similar process to amend their constitution and their legislatures for their own state regional laws. But again, the enforcement of this and the law enforcement personnel numbers, the volume of manpower, is sometimes also dependent on federal government funding. Budget from the states comes from a little bit of taxes and a bunch of money that comes from the Fed. And the money that comes from the Fed is from the federal government, but it's from the Federal Reserve, which oftentimes that money is either borrowed from other countries or just printed other bills and sent them out and didn't tell anybody, even though eventually that causes, inflation or a decrease in your purchasing power per unit of currency. So now we're building into economics a little bit. Civics and economics become intertwined with scale. So if you've got civics, society, culture, governance, and economics, in any utopian situation, there is some type of obligation to follow whatever rules the rules are and do as you're told by certain individuals, no matter what you think about it. And that the ultimate goal of a utopia is to somehow spur every single person in the collective, as it were, to simply think and operate in a way designated by the designer of said utopia. Attempts to do this in the real world, any scale, well, at all really, amount to anything from an individual small level of a type of abuse to forming cults to using propaganda to trick people into manufactured consent, acceptance of unreasonable rules, controls, etc. Dystopia. And it's been said that if an idea was really good and was for the benefit of everyone, you wouldn't need lies or propaganda or manipulation to get it done. That's the real bottom line of that. Now, your states, sorry, that was just an aside. Your states go into your national level. At national level is where you begin to have serious disputes, where there is a court system that basically is really just there to deal with things at the state level, that there needs to be oversight of the state level tops of everything. And so that's like your Supreme Court does a lot of that. And also other federal district courts. It's not just about, basically federal law has to do with state between state or going above the top level of the state on appeal. But then that top level of appeal is the final level kind of thing, right? But that's just in our system how we do it here, right now. Okay, but your countries, your collections of states, and we'll get back to that, your countries are geographically either going to have neighbors that they are at odds with, or that they are allies with, or they may be somewhat isolated. But countries end up forming alliances or organizations, or there is an attempt at a global meeting place in the UN, supposedly. But again, I've mentioned the difference between the design versus the practical operation is often due to corruption, and that corruption is often more due to the need to maintain or retain control from higher levels up the pyramid, as it were. And we're moving up the pyramid as we go up scale. The higher you get on the pyramid, the smaller the number of people running it are. So you've got globally countries doing these geopolitics, as it were, that many of whom are compromised, corrupted, or controlled by a smaller number, a far smaller number than there are of countries, even then smaller number than there are organizations. There's a ton of organizations people don't know about too. So that's where you get into like your weird billionaires who drop all this money on attempting to play chess with politics on the planet. But someone pulls their strings. There are people who are so much more richer than them. And then also there are people who may just be there because it's their designation to operate the planet, and there's a higher level than that too. Or not. But then you get into the thing where, is it aliens? Is it angels? Is it demons? Is it God? Is it the devil? Is it something else? And when you get into that level of discussion, you have to get back to questions about existentialism. Is it even real? Is it simulation argument? Is this designation of a higher power and the things that you may be able to witness and experience that can prove to you subjectively, at least, that such things are real? And is that proof of a simulation, or is it a higher power? Right? Questions for later. Sliding it back down to the geopolitics. Somebody's got a chess game going, or a fantasy football league, D&D game or something, that it is the puppet strings puller for the people that are running the show, which is government as far as most of us are concerned. There are disputes between countries. Things are about to get a little bit hot. And at the same time, within our country, there are disputes between states and the government. Thankfully, there are not yet disputes between states that are any kind of a threat of violent action. And unfortunately, due to the corruption of the culture, which is leading to detriment of society, dystopia in our case, the risk is also there while all of this happens of individual instances. I don't know how mob mentality it will really get, because I think a lot of the mob stuff that we saw in 2020 was manufactured. And I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm just saying that I think a lot of the people that were doing it were ordered to do so, were paid to do so. I do seem to recall some Antifa protesters that had a big thing that said, "Where's our money?" So and then that goes back to things that I've already spoken at great length about it. Media, international organizations, NGOs, all that. The whole process of all of it, right? All of it depends on people going along with it. And if people don't go along with it, we outnumber them 1,000,000,000 to 1. We outnumber their enforcers 1,000,000 to 1. I believe we outnumber their useful idiots by about 3 to 1. But 2 out of those 3 just never let anyone know. So the reason that I see a collapse of civilization looming is that while all of this is happening, the people that are currently masquerading as the government of the United States are running stuff into the ground, starting a new war, using propaganda to attempt to convince one half of the population that the other half of the population is dangerous. And it's also very likely that other propaganda is being used to make the other half think the same thing about the first half. And therefore can logistically predict things based on history in other places. Remember I made that own nothing, be happy, eat the bugs. What if food gets so expensive that it just rots on the shelf? People realize, screw that, I'm just going to go take it. Better than waste it. And so they start looting the stores, and then the food chain or the supply chain for food breaks down. Yes, there has been an overpopulation of deer. However, there are now at least 2 significant plagues that deer may carry. Some is obvious, some is not. And I believe that any meat from those deer is probably going to make the people sick, have some kind of weird brain fever that kills them. So, also, a lot of people have been propagandized into being anti-gun, terrified, phobic. And those people won't have any means of securing meat to eat for their family or whatever. This is part of the logistics. It's taken a step back, and just every single instance of everything that I can work through on this has been derived from the idea that this is clearly intentional. It's been going on for years, that this push to through fake culture, manufactured consensus, manufactured consent, etc. It's all manufactured. A fabricated culture that leads to a dystopic society that is tolerant of fascistic government control of those who will obey. But the large majority of the people that this is inflicted upon are not of a mind to obey. It's just never come to a head. Putting us in that volatile of a state this far out. Who knows how insane it's going to get, primaries and whatever else, or everyone's going to watch it and be like, this is ridiculous. Well, what happens when you could audit an election that says that so-and-so won by more votes than God? And then if you were to get a proper audit of the whole thing and look at it and be like, oh no, it went the other way. They just flipped who got what. Wow, that's ridiculous. But they won't do that because that would take their power away. And you can't do that because you don't work for them. What if that happened? Would people stand for it? Would they be like, oh, this is fine? Or would they be like, nah, wait a minute. So yeah, I derive that because I see a societal collapse being more likely because of the culture of, I could list all the deadly sins. So we could just say culture of sin leading to a society of degeneracy. The degenerate society is not much of a society. It's just more a kind of gathering of people. And if that's the case, then the obligation or the agreement to go along to get along may not be in place. And then at that point is where your breakdown has occurred. The results of that, again, it's just one of those things where, people stop following laws or rules that are really just there to keep everyone from having conflict. Now the conflict will be open. Some of it will be vendetta. Some of it will be over honor. Some of it will be over political disagreement, blame throwing and all that. And then ultimately, while this is happening, the government continues to do things to try and appease the people that causes the people to be worse off and worse off until things like food riots happen, or Venezuela, food rotting on shelves, everyone's eating rats. And then they start throwing Molotovs at the cops. And that's in the municipalities. Then out in the counties, there are people who may be more prepared for such circumstances to remain insular and isolated out in the middle of nowhere, but with the full knowledge that it is still within range of people showing up if the cities have run out of everything and people start going farther and farther out to raid. And then eventually you run out of raiders or you run out of people to raid. Some people succumb to coercion, some people fight back, right? But at the same time as this, you have some attempt from the state level of government to maintain some kind of control and say, hey, we don't do that here. And all that will really happen is that you'll end up having, unless the cops are super cool about it, state cops or locals or sheriffs or any of them, if people are cool about like, yeah, it's pretty clear, we don't have to do an investigation here, right? But during such a time, the budget of the government to litigate or prosecute also won't be there. So this is, again, Wild West. That's why I come to that thought of a pioneer or Wild West type justice being there. And I'm not saying like people posse up, although that certainly will happen. And on a national level, you basically have a completely impotent federal government at that point, as well as the state governments being almost as impotent. And at that point is when the infrastructure, including like military and their supply set up. And that's the main thing that's important in this equation for what I'm about to get into, is that once that point is there, if the people in the positions of government no longer power, which in a way is as it should be, but it's dangerous because everyone will still be maintaining the illusion mentally that those people are somehow in charge. That those people, their positions, and everything that they control will be either already controlled by whoever is controlling them, if it's like another country or one of these oligarchy overlords, or if it's another country that just decides to show up and put their own person in and say, okay, this is our land now, and you're all under our control now. And then attempts to, fly in and break up all the... See, this is what I'm saying, intentional, that it's been set up this way, to fly in and try and stop all these... Good luck, buddy. Have fun with that. Trying to stop states versus states over issues that become moot because you're like, oh no, we just took over your government. It's possible everyone then unifies to take them out. Because at that point it's like, ooh, total invasion. But I don't know that tanks on streets will ever happen here. But I wouldn't completely rule it out as if it couldn't happen here. I just think that it's logistically difficult. But our own tanks rolling up here under the control of someone who just waltzed in and said, nah, this is mine now. That's something that must also be considered. Maybe that's an argument for why the Second Amendment covers heavier weaponry than just, bullets and firearms. Anyways, I think that's all I've got for this chunk. This is the context, some notes for why I think what I think is going to happen soon is going to happen soon rather than later. And how it will go, because if you have no idea how it will go, you will have a real difficult time surviving it. My insight comes from the fact that I was already kind of leaning into seeing this kind of thing coming and taking some preparatory steps earlier on, that then when, all of a sudden it's only me, and then also the whole world goes insane with the pandemic thing, that I was already on a process of getting ready for such a thing. I was like, oh shit, this is it. I have been doing so long enough in advance from what is about to come that I have some insight into what everyone else is about to be going through, which is why I'm putting these out. So, yeah. The interesting thing is that once all that crazy shit starts to happen, the internet will definitely not be a thing anymore. And when that happens, all of this will be gone. What will remain for future alien archaeologists exploring our burnt husk of a planet in the far, 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 far future, cosmic timescales, will show up and they'll be like, oh, we found this decrepitated little chunk of metal and there's symbols on it. It'll be a piece of one of the steel discs that L. Ron Hubbard of the Church of Scientology had buried in a climate controlled mountain vault, telling a complete bullshit story. And that's what they're going to think happened here. That's really all that matters, and all it comes to is that that's what they'll find. And if this is a simulation of humanity to figure out what the fuck actually happened, there is literally no way that a simulation could be made from that could generate this reality. So I don't think that's what's going on here. But if they ever did, they would seriously, all they would get is that South Park episode based on a little chunk. But that's all the internet will be gone. Things that take a while to break down. The world will move on. And some people in some parts of the world will end up doing things that cause potentially mass destruction. People won't even see it coming. They won't know. They'll be too busy being, plains people again or whatever, living on a hillside, figuring out how to get by. And there may or may not be a nuke because of it. So, fun times ahead of us. That's why I've been preparing for things. That's why when the shit officially hit the fan with COVID And if you don't believe that, I don't know what to tell you, man. I've been watching, I've been looking, everything's been going downhill from that. Certainly there's other factors and other signs that I saw, but to be like, yeah, no, this is it. This is not a drill. That was 3 years ago. So this is where I'm at. I hope you're in a good place. And if not, you got no excuses. Have a good day.